Morning, everybody. For those who don't know us, Carmel Ventures is one of the largest VCs in Israel, and for the past few years, we've been involved in investments in startup in the big data area throughout the stack, starting from multi-tier storage companies like Reduxio, NoSQL database companies such as Redis Lab, full-stack cloud services like Kula Data. So overall, we've spent quite a lot of time, I think, in learning the area. And when Asaf presented kind of the distribution of the audience today, one thing that he forgot to say is that there is one person in the crowd which has no technical background at all, and that's me. But I think that, but because of this, I spend most of my time meeting companies, talking to customers, sitting at board meetings and understanding what our company's customers are saying. And I think that we have a good overview from a user perspective. What is the value of big data? And after a few years of dealing with the subject, I'm asking myself several, high-level questions that I thought it could be a good opportunity to share those questions with you. Now, this presentation doesn't mean to be very provocative, but these are real questions that I think that we all as an industry should try and answer. And honestly, I don't know the answers to those, so I might be wrong in some of the assumptions that I have over here. But I heard, both Ben and Ron addressing some of the things that I'm going to discuss today. So I think that I'm not the only one who kind of have those questions. So the first question regarding big data that I'm constantly asking myself is it working? So there's a lot of great technologies that are out there, and I think that we are seeing, and I think that both, Ben and Ron have addressed the issue of the application layer and the actual business outcomes that comes out of it. And I think that we can divide the market into, in some cases it's really working well, in some cases it really doesn't. Still. So for instance, when we take things like DNA sequencing in genomics, definitely, it was a problem that the main issue was computing power. When we have more computing power, problems becomes easier, and there's definitely a lot of business value, a lot of social value that comes out of those things. Payment fraud. 0.6% of all e-commerce transactions are marked as fraudulent by those systems. Is it accurate? Of course not. But 0.6% is something that you can roll into the financial model. E-commerce vendors can, put them into their business model and say, I'm going to lose money for every 0.6, percent of the transaction. It falls into this. Doesn't have to be really accurate, and still it provides a lot of value because at the overall it allows this very sophisticated ecosystem to work. I think maybe the place where big data has really made it to the real extreme of being very, very successful is advertising. Everything is real-time bidding, right? We're talking about milliseconds of understanding the targeting audience and providing and creating on the fly, the right advertising to serve to those. So I think there are definitely areas in which all the things that were discussed over here, the enhanced performance, the ability to use big data and provide some business value out of this, definitely some things are working. I think that many, many things are not working. And there's a lot of money that is being spent on those, and I'll just give a few examples. One of them is cybersecurity. Sure, a lot of big data, a lot of smart people, some of them in the crowd are working, a lot of machine learning algorithm, anomaly detections, and whatever are being used. Is it working? No, it's not working. At the end of the day, there are some signs, there are some red flags that are being caught. At the end of the day, many people, and just came back 3 weeks ago from RSA conference in California, chief security officers are standing on the stage and saying, we lost the battle. The attacks are already in, we have a lot of information, but we really cannot stop it. It is not accurate enough. Same goes to IT health monitoring. In large enterprises are talking about million logs per minute that their IT infrastructure predict. Now, sure, we have Splunk, we have ArcSight, we have all others, those big systems that now can take all this information and store it. Do we get the business value out of it? Who can read those? And one of the important things of those two aspects is when we used to have small data, we used to have few false positives. When we have big data, in some of those cases, we have a lot of false positives. And the issue of false positive is becoming one of the biggest issues of deriving business value out of big data application. Sure, the technologies are there. In my mind, not always, they're not accurate enough, they don't provide business value, and actually we are now starting to see tiers and tiers of startups that are trying to solve this. So one startup is collecting the data, one startup is alerting, and another startup on top of this is trying to reduce the amount of alerts, and a startup above that is trying to visualize it in a manner. At the end of the day, still a lot of room to go over there. Same goes to business intelligence. Business intelligence may be the heart and soul of big data. And again, many great companies, many great tools, but I can tell you, also as a customer myself, a customer of big data, that is seeing a lot of financial information, a lot of sales and marketing information, a lot of stuff. So we got a lot of data, and at the end, we got a lot of graphs, and a lot of maps, and a lot of dots, and a lot of pie charts. Does it really help for the executive management to take better decisions? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I think that we are starting to see some very interesting early signs of startups that are starting to think a little differently. Then maybe visualization is not the right approach, that maybe taking a lot of data and visualizing in the right way just create a lot of visualizations. Maybe the issue of querying a data and getting an answer isn't the right approach. Maybe we should come up with hypothesis and ask the system whether this hypothesis is good or not. Maybe we should ask the business questions and not just get the data out of this. Still early, so I think that overall, I think we are getting there. But I think that for every technology that we apply, we should really ask the question: are we there yet? And I think that for the majority of the application, we are not there yet. Maybe I think everyone was touching Hadoop over here. Hadoop has become almost a synonym of big data. And definitely in the BI space. And we used to have a world we had Netezza and Teradata and Greenplum and all those data warehouse appliances that we needed in order to digest a lot of data. They needed specialized hardware. They needed a specialized data structure, which was tailored exactly to the types of the solution that they had. Suddenly came Hadoop. It's open source. It's scalable, it's great. Is it? And I think that one of the interesting things that we are seeing, and again, I think that Ron alluded to that, and I think what's interesting is I'm not talking about Hadoop specifically, but I'm talking about the pace of innovation. So we are talking that we used to have those data warehouse appliances that I described, then came the Hadoop ecosystem. Now the Hadoop ecosystem is very impressive, right? We have 3 companies behind Hadoop, at least, Cloudera, Hortonworks, Mapr, each one of them worth between $1 billion and $5 billion in market cap. That's really impressive. Some of them are growing very, very fast. At the end of the day, this very, very fast still sums to few hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, much smaller than the data warehouse appliances when they used to be very big. And already, Ben mostly discussed Spark, right? Which is already disrupting Hadoop. So Hadoop, which has disrupted the data warehouse world, and it's in its infancy, only a few hundreds of million dollars in revenue, still growing at a very large pace, is already being disrupted itself because of some of the inherent problems that Hadoop has as a technology. it's too slow, it's very hard to implement, very bad user interface that makes those big data projects very, very hard. At the end of the day, we are talking about few thousands of customers that are using Hadoop throughout the world, not very much for the amount of enterprise that we are seeing. Now, you can take the same thing about, the disruptor being disrupted, and you can apply it to other areas in our business, right? SSDs replace hard disks. They didn't become mainstream, and suddenly they're being disrupted by in-memory solutions, right? And so what's going to be happen to in-memory solutions? So the pace of innovation in which the infrastructure or the ecosystem, it can't be built fast enough before it's being disrupted itself, raises many questions about how all of us should treat this space of innovation and how we should, move along and treat that. But I find this, phenomenon to be, extremely, extremely interesting. The third question, which I'm kind of struggling a lot, kind of trying to understand the business side of big data, the value to the customers, the ability of the vendor to create value through actually providing value to their customer, to providing businesses, is obviously a lot of those big data solutions rely on open source. What does open source do to the market? Does it do good to the market? Does it do bad to the market? And again, it's a question. Obviously, there are two sides to this equation, and I'm not sure. And I'll give you just one example. Another, we all know a very big market that was disrupted by open source. That's the operating system world, right? So Windows used to sell billions of dollars of Windows 10 or 20 years ago. Then came Linux, then came Android, then came Mac, which, the OS X is embedded into the hardware that you buy. Now Windows 10, is going to be upgraded for free. Sure, we have Red Hat, which sells for, $1 billion, mostly of services of Linux, but we are talking about a $10 billion market, which has shrunk today to maybe $1 billion in revenues, indirect revenues from the operating system. Is there a risk that the same will happen to a lot of those verticals that have verticals within the big data area that are adopting open source? I think that's a very interesting question to be said. Now again, the open source, sure, it has its values, but I think it also kind of, and the way I think of it, I'm not sure that it is going to diminish the overall market size. I do think that it's going to change it significantly. So we are talking from, instead of selling software licenses, the core is free. So what most of those companies, definitely, Cloudera and Hortonworks, but also companies like MongoDB and others, what is the revenue coming from? It's coming from professional services, support, training, maintaining this. No real production environment is really free. No one is going to take open source and run its production in large enterprises when they have all the liability without paying. Now, whether that's paying for licensed software, not necessarily, but it's going to be paying someone. It's going to be paying someone, to make sure that that this is happening. Is this a better source of revenue? I'm not sure, and I'm going to talk about it in 2 or 3 slides. Same goes to the core is free, and I like to call this slide, is it real innovation or is it just a good marketing? At the end of the day, I look a little, kind of a critical review on some of the open source trends. Most open source projects have very few contributors. So the core doesn't really change. There's a lot of, things around it that has to do with the installability, with the UI, with anything that has to do with it, that is being contributed by the community, by the commercialization companies around it, but the core doesn't really. But there is a lot of you are developers over here. It's very good marketing, because when we market to developers, it's very puristic. You're not advertising this. You're creating content. The content is very technical. At the end of the day, and we are involved in several of those open source companies, you would like to have an install base of free users that you would like to upgrade them then to a professional services or to an enterprise grade level. There is very little puristic approach in the way that this is doing, and I like to call open source as the freemium for developers, right? So in the enterprise software, many will call it freemium. I think that there's a lot of commercial activity behind it, and companies have learned how they can very well monetize on some of those open source approaches. But what I think is the really impact of the fact that the infrastructure is built on open source is this. And I'm a big believer in cloud. Again, not because of all the great technologies and all, the scale out and the cost saving, etc. Because again, looking at things from a user perspective side, both the consumer or the enterprise or the enterprise users, what cloud really delivered on the promise is of ubiquitous computing, right? So suddenly, when I install a CRM system in my organization, then no longer the days of the long implementations of Oracle or SAP with the $2 million of professional services and 3 years of implementation. I just roll into Salesforce, and I'm there, and I start working. And same goes to the other enterprise software. This doesn't happen in big data. Right? So in big data, we are still talking about those large implementations of Hadoop that require a lot of professional services, that require a lot of data scientists to try to extract the information out of the data, implementing stacks and stacks of solutions, as was mentioned here by Ron, I think, talking about you have the infrastructure layer, then you need the data scientists, then you have to apply the machine learning and the analytics part, then you have to visualize all of this. It's very hard. There is no, I log in and click and suddenly I have all my BI information in front of me. And at the end of the day, BI is just another enterprise software application. And it's growing in the wrong direction in many, many ways, right? Why weren't we able, all of us, as an ecosystem, to create or to transform big data in something which is really ubiquitous? Again, the answers to this, I think that some of the things have to do with the open source. Again, the open source is very core. It's distributed. Again, people download it themselves. They build the stacks themselves. The commercialization software around it, the services around this have all created, kind of a project-based approach rather than, the online approach that we have. Do the technologies allow for that? I think they do. I think that in some, science historians will say why the industry has evolved that way. But I think this is something, and going back to my earlier comment about the pace of innovation, if we will not be able to implement big data solution faster, then by the time we are going to implement them, they're going to be disrupted by the next technology. And I think that realize, very well, we have to learn how to deploy those things much, much faster than we have. And this is my last question, and I think you already understand how I got to this. When you look at the end of the day at the way that the industry is being set, and most of the people in this room, most of them are in the software business, some of them are in the hardware business. But big data today is a services business. And it's going to continue to be a services business. And even in 2020, when it's going to be a $50 billion industry, still half of it is going to be a services industry, which is going to move very, very slow, which is going to require a lot of professional services and implementation to be done. And I think, and I call for all of us here in the room, I think that we must change this. We must turn big data into something that has the business value behind it, that we can deploy faster, that is really a software and technology-enabled services kind of solution, again, for the benefit of all of us. Thank you very much.